The December wind cut through my thin jacket as I stood on the doorstep of the Mason family estate, watching my mother-in-law's perfectly manicured hand wave goodbye before she slammed the heavy oak door in my face. I placed one hand protectively over my growing belly, trying to process how quickly everything had fallen apart. My name is Emma Chen, and at 28 years old, I found myself pregnant, alone, and locked out of what had been my home for the past 3 years. But Victoria Mason had no idea what she'd just done, or who she was really dealing with. "You'll thank me for this later, James," I heard her say through the door to my husband. "She was never good enough for you. No connections, no family money, just some scholarship girl who got lucky." I waited for James to defend me, to say something. Anything. But his silence spoke volumes. The same silence that had grown between us over the past few months as his mother's influence poisoned everything we built together. The irony was, Victoria Mason was right about one thing. I had gotten lucky, but not in a way she thought. 3 years ago, I was a software engineer fresh out of MIT, working on an AI algorithm that could revolutionize supply chain management. James and I met at a tech conference where I was presenting my research. He was there representing his family's shipping company, Mason Global Logistics. It was love at first sight, at least that's what I thought. The wedding was rushed, small, intimate. Victoria never approved, but James had insisted. "We don't need their blessing," he'd said back then. "We just need each other." Those words felt hollow now as I stood in the cold, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid air. What Victoria didn't know was that for the past year, I'd been building something in secret. Something that would change everything. The algorithm I'd been developing wasn't just theoretical anymore, it was ready. And while Victoria was busy planning charity galas and criticizing my common background, I'd been quietly meeting with investors, securing patents, and laying the groundwork for my own company. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly from both cold and adrenaline, and dialed the one person I knew I could count on. "Maya, it's happening." They kicked me out. Maya Chen, my older sister and brilliant corporate lawyer, didn't miss a beat. "I'm on my way. The apartment is ready. Time to launch Plan B." I could hear her grabbing her keys, the determination in her voice giving me strength. Maya had always been my rock, especially after we lost our parents in an accident 10 years ago. She was the one who'd encouraged me to keep working on my algorithm even after I married James. "Never put all your eggs in one basket, little sister," she warned me, especially not a golden one. As I waited for Maya, I thought about the last conversation I'd had with James earlier that morning. He found the prenatal vitamins in my drawer, and instead of being happy about the baby, he looked worried. "Did you plan this?" he'd asked, his voice tight. "Is this some kind of trap?" The accusation had stunned me. Trap? "James, we're married. We talked about having children." "Mother thinks the timing is suspicious," he'd said, running his hands through his hair. "With the company's merger coming up." I should have seen it then, how deeply his mother's paranoia had infected him. How the sweet, supportive man I'd marry had become just another puppet in Victoria Mason's grand plan for her family's dynasty. Maya's sleek black Tesla pulled up to the curb, and she jumped out, wrapping me in a fierce hug. "Those pretentious snobs," she muttered, helping me with my bags. "Just wait until they see what's coming." As we drove away from the Mason estate, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Victoria thought she was protecting her family's empire by getting rid of me. She had no idea she'd just set in motion exactly what I'd been waiting for. Maya glanced at me as she navigated through the city streets. "You okay? The stress isn't good for the baby." I placed a hand on my belly, feeling a small kick. "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Remember how you told me to always have a backup plan?" She nodded, turning onto the highway that led to her downtown apartment building. "Well," I said, pulling out my laptop, "I have something to show you. That algorithm I've been working on, it's not just theoretical anymore. I've been running simulations using Mason Global's shipping data that James gave me access to when we first got married." Maya's eyes widened. "Emma, what exactly have you been up to?" I opened my laptop, showing her the results of my latest simulation. I've created an AI-driven logistics system that can predict supply chain disruptions before they happen, optimize shipping routes in real time, and reduce costs by up to 40%. I call it ChainSight. "And you've tested this using Mason Global's data?" I nodded. James gave me full access to their systems when we got married. He wanted me to understand the family business. Victoria was furious about it, but he insisted. I've been running simulations for months, perfecting the algorithm. Maya pulled into her building's parking garage, turning to face me fully. Emma, do you realize what you have here? I do, I said, closing my laptop. And so do the venture capitalists I've been meeting with. They're ready to fund ChainSight's launch. We're just waiting for my signal. Maya's face broke into a wide grin. And Victoria just gave you the perfect reason to launch. As we rode the elevator to Maya's penthouse apartment, I thought about Victoria's smug face as she pushed me out the door. She thought she was getting rid of a gold digger, a nobody who trapped her precious son. Instead, she just freed me to become her biggest competitor. Maya's apartment was everything the Mason estate wasn't: modern, minimal, and warm. She'd set up the guest room for me weeks ago, just in case. My sister had always been the pragmatic one. Get some rest, she said, helping me unpack. Tomorrow, we start making calls. It's time to show the Masons what a nobody from nowhere can really do. That night, as I lay in bed, my hand resting on my growing belly, I felt stronger than I had in months. Victoria thought she was protecting her family's legacy. Instead, she'd just given me the push I needed to build my own. My phone buzzed. A text from James. Mother says this is for the best. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Let him think I was broken, devastated. Let Victoria believe she'd won. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my lead investor, Sarah Chen. No relation, though we joked about it. Ready when you are. Say the word, and we'll start the funding round. I looked out Maya's window at the city skyline, where Mason Global's headquarters dominated the view. Soon, they'd see my company's name up there too. But first, I had work to do. Maya was already up, making breakfast and taking calls. She cleared her schedule for the next week to help me set everything in motion. As I walked into the kitchen, she handed me a prenatal vitamin and a glass of orange juice. The team's ready, she said, hanging up her phone. We can file the incorporation papers today. You're sure about this? I took the vitamin, thinking about James' accusation yesterday. Had I planned this? Not exactly. But I'd been prepared for it thanks to Maya's constant warnings and my own instincts. I'm sure, I said, pulling out my laptop. Victoria wants a war. Let's give her one. Maya smiled, that fierce, protective smile I'd known all my life. Then let's get to work. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, calls, and paperwork. Maya's law firm handled everything efficiently, and by the end of the week, ChainSight was officially incorporated. The initial funding round was oversubscribed. It seemed every investor in town wanted a piece of what we were building. James tried calling several times, but I let everything go to voicemail. His messages grew increasingly anxious as news of ChainSight's incorporation spread through the business community. Emma, what are you doing? His last message demanded. Mother's furious. She says you stole company secrets. We could sue you for this. I played the message for Maya, who just laughed. Let them try. Every bit of data you used was legally accessed with full permission. We have James's emails proving it. She was right, of course. I documented everything meticulously, knowing this day might come. Victoria Mason hadn't raised an idiot for a son. She just never expected his wife to be smarter than he was. As I ended part one of my story here, I was just getting started. Victoria Mason thought she'd taught me a lesson about knowing my place. Instead, she'd given me exactly what I needed: freedom to build something that would change everything, not just for me and my baby, but for the entire industry she thought she controlled. The real question was, what would happen when she realized exactly what she'd done? 6 months after Victoria Mason slammed her door in my face, I stood in front of a packed conference room at the National Logistics Convention. My hand rested on my now visible baby bump as I prepared to demonstrate ChainSight to the industry's biggest players. The irony wasn't lost on me that Mason Global's leadership team sat in the front row, Victoria and James among them. Victoria's face was set in its usual mask of cold disdain, but I could see the tension in her jaw. James just looked pale. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady despite the flutter of movement in my belly. What you're about to see will revolutionize how we think about supply chain management. As I launched into the demonstration, showing real-time optimization of shipping routes and predictive analytics that could save companies millions. I watched Victoria's expression shift from dismissive to concerned. By the time I showed the cost-saving projections, she was gripping her armrests so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The past 6 months had been intense. Maya and I had worked around the clock, building the company from her penthouse apartment. Our team grew quickly, brilliant engineers and developers who believed in the vision. The pregnancy hadn't been easy, but every kick from my baby felt like a reminder of why I was doing this. Victoria had tried everything to stop us. First came the cease and desist letters, claiming I'd stolen proprietary information. Maya's legal team shut that down quickly, producing documentation of every permission James had given me to access their systems. Then came the whisper campaign. Rumors about my character, my background, suggestions that I was unstable. But Victoria had underestimated how much the industry was ready for change. Chainsight's early trials with smaller shipping companies had produced results that couldn't be ignored. Any questions? I asked as I concluded the presentation. The room erupted with raised hands, but Victoria was already on her feet. "This is nothing but smoke and mirrors," she announced, her voice sharp. "Ms. Chen claims her system can reduce costs by 40%, but where's the proof? Mason Global has been in this industry for generations. We know what's possible and what isn't." I smiled, having anticipated this moment. "Excellent question, Mrs. Mason. Perhaps your son can help answer it, since he's seen the system in action." All eyes turned to James, who looked like he wanted to disappear. He knew exactly what I was referring to. The trial runs I'd done using Mason Global's data, the ones he'd enthusiastically approved before his mother poisoned everything. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his face betrayed him. "Really?" I pulled up a series of emails on the screen behind me. "Because according to these messages, you were quite impressed with the initial results. In fact, you called them revolutionary and suggested implementing them company-wide." Victoria's face turned scarlet. The emails were damning, not just for their content, but because they proved every accusation she'd made about me stealing company secrets was false. James had been my biggest supporter, right up until she turned him against me. After the presentation, investors swarmed around me. Maya handled most of them, her legal expertise proving invaluable as we fielded partnership offers and investment proposals. I noticed James hovering at the edge of the crowd, looking lost. Finally, he approached me as the room began to clear. Victoria was nowhere in sight. "Emma," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The man I'd fallen in love with seemed smaller somehow, diminished. "About what, James? About how you let your mother kick out your pregnant wife? Or about how you've spent the last 6 months trying to destroy what I've built?" He flinched. "I didn't know about the baby, about any of it." Mother said. "That's the problem." I cut him off. Mother said, "Mother thinks, Mother knows best. When was the last time you thought for yourself?" "The company's stock dropped 15% after your presentation," he said, changing tactics. Mother's furious. "The board is asking questions. Maybe we could work something out." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Now you want to work something out? After everything?" "You're still my wife," he said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "Actually, I'm not. The divorce papers were delivered to your office this morning. Maya's firm handled everything. You should read them carefully, especially the part about the baby." His face fell. "Emma, please. That's my child, too." "Yes," I agreed, "and you'll have visitation rights once they're born. But you lost the right to be their father the day you chose your mother over your family." Maya appeared at my elbow, right on cue. "Everything okay here?" James stepped back, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, Emma, for everything." "I'm not," I said honestly. "Everything that happened led me here. Chainsight is already revolutionizing the industry, and we're just getting started. So thank your mother for me, James. She gave me exactly what I needed, freedom." As he walked away, Maya squeezed my arm. "You okay?" I nodded, watching James disappear into the crowd. "Better than okay. Did you see the partnership offers we got today? 6 major shipping companies want to implement Chainsight immediately," Maya confirmed. "And that's just the beginning. Victoria's worst nightmare is coming true. You're not just competing with Mason Global. You're going to surpass them." 2 weeks later, I sat in my new office reviewing the latest performance reports. Chainsight was growing faster than even our most optimistic projections had predicted. Companies were switching to our system in droves, drawn by the cost savings and efficiency improvements. Mason Global's stock had continued to fall as investors questioned their ability to compete in the changing landscape. I'd heard through industry gossip that Victoria had been forced to step down from the board, though she was fighting it every step of the way. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Maya entered, waving a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a news article. The headline made me catch my breath. Mason Global Logistics announces major restructuring. CEO James Mason steps down. "He's leaving the company?" I asked, scanning the article. Maya nodded. Word is he's starting his own venture, something about embracing innovation and new directions in logistics. I sat back, absently rubbing my belly where the baby was kicking. His mother must be beside herself. "Oh, she is," Maya grinned. "But that's not all. Look at the last paragraph." I read it and felt a strange mix of emotions. In a surprising move, James Mason has expressed interest in potential collaborations with emerging industry leaders, specifically citing Chainsight's revolutionary approach to supply chain management. "What do you think?" Maya asked. "Should we hear him out?" I thought about it, remembering the man I've fallen in love with, the one who'd been excited about innovation before his mother's influence took over. Maybe, free from Victoria's control, that man still existed somewhere. Set up a meeting, I decided. But make it clear, this is business, nothing more. If he wants to work with Chainsight, he'll need to prove himself just like anyone else. Maya nodded, understanding perfectly. And Victoria? I smiled, thinking of my former mother-in-law and her grand plans for her family's legacy. She can watch from the sidelines as everything she tried to protect gets transformed by the nobody from nowhere she threw out in the cold. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and I placed both hands on my belly. In 2 months, I'd be a mother myself. But unlike Victoria, I would teach my child that true legacy isn't about maintaining control. It's about having the courage to create something new. Victoria had thought she was protecting her son's inheritance when she kicked me out that cold December day. Instead, she triggered a revolution in the industry she thought she controlled, led by the very person she underestimated most. As I looked out my office window at the city skyline, where the Chainsight logo now shone as brightly as Mason Global's, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about soaring higher than your enemies ever thought possible. I watched through the one-way glass as my parents shifted uncomfortably in the leather chairs of the bank's executive conference room. Time had changed them. Father's hair now completely silver, mother's perfect posture slightly stooped. But their air of entitled superiority remained intact even as they prepared to beg for financial salvation. The Chen family's request for a $50 million emergency loan. Thomas, my CFO, reviewed the file in front of me. Their real estate empire is on the verge of collapse. Overextended, overleveraged, and severely impacted by the market downturn. I nodded, studying my parents' faces. They hadn't seen me in 20 years, not since the night they'd thrown me out for choosing love over their arranged marriage plans. My name is Victoria Chen, and 2 decades ago, I was the perfect daughter of one of San Francisco's wealthiest families. Then I fell in love with James Walker, a brilliant software engineer from a working-class background. My parents' response had been swift and absolute: marry their choice, wealthy real estate heir Andrew Kim, or be cut off completely. I chose James. "They don't know you own Meridian Bank?" Thomas asked quietly. "No," I replied, remembering the day I'd walked away from my family's wealth and privilege. "They probably assume I'm living in some middle-class suburb, married to my poor husband." The irony wasn't lost on me. James's software innovations had made us billionaires within 10 years of our marriage, while my parents continued building their real estate empire the old way, through connections, leverage, and family money. We quietly revolutionized financial technology. 5 years ago, we'd bought Meridian Bank as part of our expansion into financial services. Now, watching my parents await their fate in that conference room, I thought about all they'd missed. Our wedding, celebrated with friends who loved us for who we were, not what we owned. The birth of our children, now teenagers who'd never met their grandparents. Every success, every milestone, every moment of the life they deemed beneath them. Their financials are worse than they're admitting, Thomas continued, flipping through reports. Without this loan, they'll default on multiple properties within months. The Chen empire will collapse. I studied the papers in front of me. The numbers told a clear story. My parents had overextended, betting big on luxury developments just before the market turned. Their old methods of doing business, relying on personal relationships and social connections, hadn't adapted to changing times. Mrs. Walker. Thomas's voice pulled me from my thoughts. How would you like to proceed? Before I could answer, the conference room door opened and Robert Nash, our senior loan officer, entered to meet with my parents. I turned up the room's audio. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, Robert began formally. I've reviewed your loan application. Surely you know our reputation, my father interrupted, his voice carrying that familiar note of aristocratic assumption. The Chen family has been a pillar of San Francisco society for generations. Yes, sir, Robert replied smoothly. However, in today's market, reputation alone isn't sufficient security for a loan of this magnitude. My mother's back stiffened. We have collateral. Properties, assets. All heavily leveraged, Robert countered. Your debt-to-equity ratio is concerning and your recent projects have significantly underperformed projections. This is merely a temporary setback, my father insisted. The market will turn. When? Robert asked simply. Your nearest loan payment is due in 6 weeks. Without this financing, you'll default on at least 3 major properties. The silence that followed was heavy. I watched my parents exchange glances, decades of certainty in their own superiority crumbling in real time. Perhaps, Robert continued carefully, you have other resources, family members who could assist. My mother's face tightened. Our only daughter is no longer part of the family. Ah, yes. Robert consulted his notes with practiced casualness. Victoria Chen, now Victoria Walker. Quite successful in technology and banking, I believe. Her company's market cap recently exceeded $20 billion. I had to admire Robert's technique as he let that information sink in. My parents' expressions shifted from dismissal to shock as they processed the reality of their disowned daughter's wealth. Victoria, my father's voice cracked slightly. That's impossible. She married that engineer. James Walker, Robert supplied, the founder of Walker Tech. Their financial software revolutionized banking infrastructure. Surely you've heard of them. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. We haven't had contact. For 20 years, Robert finished, since you disowned her for marrying beneath her social class. Though given current circumstances, one might question whose choice proved more financially astute. I almost smiled at the subtle dig. Robert was playing his role perfectly, letting my parents face the full impact of their past decisions. The loan, my father tried to redirect, his voice less certain now. Surely our assets are insufficient, Robert stated flatly. Without additional security or a guarantor, I cannot recommend approval. The weight of those words settled over the room. 20 years of certainty in their own superiority, their own rightness, crashing down in a single meeting. What? My mother's voice was barely audible. What are our options? Robert closed his folder deliberately. You could approach your daughter. Her resources could easily secure this loan. Though given your history, no, my father's pride surfaced briefly. We cannot. Cannot what? Robert's voice sharpened slightly. Cannot admit you were wrong? Cannot acknowledge that the daughter you rejected for marrying beneath her station has achieved more wealth and success than you imagined possible. My parents sat in stunned silence. In their world, bankers didn't speak to them this way. But their world was crumbling, and with it, all the old certainties. I'll leave you to consider your options, Robert stood. Though I should mention, you're not the only one seeking financing for distressed properties in this market. These opportunities don't last long. After he left, I watched my parents sit in silence, 2 decades of choices and consequences hanging heavy between them. Victoria, my mother finally whispered. All this time. We should go, my father stood abruptly. There must be other banks, other options. There aren't, I said softly to the one-way glass. I've made sure of that. Thomas looked at me questioningly. Your instructions? I thought about the night I'd left, carrying a single suitcase, walking away from wealth and privilege toward an uncertain future with the man I loved. I thought about James's quiet confidence as we built something together, something real. And I thought about our children raised to value character over class, innovation over inheritance. Let them stew for a few days, I decided. Let them face the reality of their situation. Then have Robert call them back for another meeting. And if they reach out to you directly? I smiled, remembering all the ignored letters over the years, the attempts to maintain their control through silence and rejection. They won't, I said certainly. Their pride won't let them. At least, not yet. As I watched them gather their things, my mother's hands shaking slightly as she picked up her designer handbag, my father's shoulders bent under the weight of impending failure, I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that sometimes life has a way of bringing things full circle. They walked out of the conference room, stepping into their waiting car, less luxurious than in years past, I noted, likely heading back to their mansion to regroup, to plan, to avoid facing the inevitable. But I knew what they did. Their options had already run out. Every major bank in the city was either owned by us or partnered with us. Every potential investor had been quietly warned away. The empire they built on social status and old money was about to collapse, leaving them with only one possible salvation: the daughter they'd rejected for daring to choose her own path. Thomas gathered the papers, pausing at the door. The next meeting? 3 days, I decided. Let's see how they handle the wait. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the glass. Successful, confident, self-made. Everything they'd feared I'd never be without their guidance and control. Oh, and Thomas, I added, make sure Robert mentions that Meridian Bank recently came under new ownership. Let them start wondering exactly who they're dealing with. 3 days stretched into 5 as my parents explored every possible alternative to facing their situation. Through our extensive network, I tracked their increasingly desperate attempts to secure financing elsewhere. Each inquiry met with polite but firm rejections. They've started selling assets, Thomas reported, setting a folder on my desk. Their vacation home in Aspen, 3 luxury cars, your mother's jewelry collection. I picked up the folder, studying recent photos of my childhood home. The perfectly manicured gardens looked slightly overgrown now, the grand facade showing signs of deferred maintenance. And the company? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Share price is falling. Contractors are demanding upfront payments. 3 major projects are at risk of complete shutdown. The Chen family empire, built over 3 generations, was crumbling in real time. And still my parents resisted the obvious solution. Then came the call we'd been waiting for. They've requested another meeting, Robert announced, but with one condition. They want to meet the bank's owner. I closed my eyes briefly, 20 years of memories washing over me. Set it up. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. That evening, I told James about the meeting. He listened quietly as he always did, his brilliant engineer's mind processing the implications. Are you sure about this? He asked finally. We could buy their properties through intermediaries, save their company without revealing yourself. I shook my head. No, they need to understand exactly how wrong they were. About you, about me, about everything they thought they knew about worth and value. He pulled me close, and I breathed in the familiar scent of the man they deemed unworthy of their daughter. Whatever you decide, he said softly, I'm with you, just like always. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not in the designer labels my mother had insisted were essential to our social status, but in a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of confidence rather than wealth, success on my own terms. I'd arrived early, watching through the one-way glass as my parents were escorted into the conference room. They looked tired, the strain of impending financial ruin evident in their postures. Mrs. Walker. Thomas appeared at my side. They're ready. I took a deep breath. Let's finish this. The moment I walked into the conference room, time seemed to stop. My mother's hand flew to her throat, her face draining of color. My father half rose from his chair, sinking back as recognition hit him fully. Victoria, my mother whispered. Hello, mother. Father. I took my seat at the head of the table, noting how their eyes tracked my every movement. I believe you wanted to meet the owner of Meridian Bank. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 years of rejection, of pretending I didn't exist, shattered by the reality of their current situation. You, my father's voice cracked. You own the bank. Among other things, I kept my tone professional. Walker Tech, my husband's company, You remember James, the unsuitable engineer, has grown significantly since you last saw us. All this time, my mother's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. You've been successful? Yes, I opened their loan application. Unlike Chen Developments, which appears to be on the verge of collapse, my father's pride made one last attempt. We don't need. Yes, you do, I cut him off. You need $50 million immediately to avoid default. Another $100 million within 6 months to stabilize your projects. Without it, 3 generations of the Chen family legacy disappears. They sat in stunned silence as I laid out their situation with brutal precision. How? My mother's voice trembled. How did you build all this? I gestured to our surroundings. Without your connections, your social circle, your arranged marriages, by understanding that true worth isn't about who you know or where you come from. It's about innovation, adaptation, seeing the future instead of clinging to the past. Victoria, my father leaned forward. Whatever happened, we're still family. Are we? I met his gaze steadily. 20 years ago, family meant controlling who I could love. It meant choosing status over happiness. It meant turning your back on your only daughter because she saw value in something beyond your narrow definition of worth. We were trying to protect you, my mother whispered. No, I corrected quietly. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. I pulled out another folder, photos of my life they'd missed. My wedding to James, the birth of our children, holidays, celebrations, moments of joy shared with people who loved us for who we were, not what we owned. Your grandchildren, I said, watching their faces as they stared at images of teenagers they'd never met. Emma's starting college next year, MIT, early admission. Michael's already developing his own software. They've never known their grandparents, never understood why their mother's family chose pride over love. Tears rolled down my mother's face as she touched the photos. My father's hands trembled slightly. The loan application, I continued professionally. I'll be direct. No other bank will help you. We made sure of that. Your only option is Meridian Bank, is me. What? My father swallowed hard. What are your terms? I placed a document on the table. Full disclosure of all assets and liabilities. Complete restructuring of management. You'll step down. Professional executives will be appointed. And, I pause, letting the moment stretch. And, my mother prompted. And you'll both attend Sunday dinner at my house. Every week, you'll get to know your grandchildren, not as heirs to a fortune, but as the remarkable people they are. You'll see the life you rejected, understand the happiness you dismissed as beneath you. They stared at me, decades of pride warring with desperation. If we refuse, my father asked quietly, then Chen Developments fails, your empire collapses, and you spend your retirement wondering if your social status was worth the family you lost. The silence that followed was heavy with 20 years of choices and consequences. When? My mother's voice wavered. When is dinner? Sunday at 6, I stood gathering my papers. Don't be late. Emma's making her grandmother's dumplings. The ones you taught me before status became more important than family. As I walked to the door, my father called out, Victoria, we were wrong. I turned back, seeing for the first time not the powerful parents who'd shaped my childhood, but 2 elderly people facing the consequences of their choices. Yes, I said softly. You were. The question is, are you ready to make it right? The following Sunday, at exactly 6 o'clock, a car pulled up to our house. Not their usual luxury vehicle, but a modest sedan. I watched through the window as my parents approached the door, clutching a bottle of wine and looking more uncertain than I'd ever seen them. Emma opened the door, the granddaughter they'd never met welcoming them with her father's warm smile and her mother's strength. You must be my grandparents, she said simply. Come in. Dinner's almost ready. As they stepped into the home I'd built with the man they'd rejected, I saw them take in the success their narrow vision hadn't been able to imagine, not in designer labels or imported furniture, but in the patents framed on the walls, the prototypes of James's innovations, the awards for contributions to technology and finance. Welcome, James stepped forward, the unsuitable engineer now a respected innovator. We've been waiting a long time for this. And as we sat down to dinner, 3 generations at one table for the first time, I watched my parents begin to understand what they'd really lost 20 years ago. Not status or social position, but the chance to be part of something genuine, something built on love and innovation rather than privilege and pride. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. That would take time, effort, and genuine change on their part. But it was a beginning. A chance to rebuild not just their company, but something far more valuable. A family connection based on who we were, not what we owned. The Chen Empire might have crumbled, but from its ruins, something more authentic could grow. If they were willing to learn, to change, to see value beyond their old definitions of worth. As Emma served her dumplings, perfect replicas of her grandmother's recipe, learned from my memories rather than direct teaching, I saw tears in my mother's eyes. Perhaps she was finally understanding that true legacy isn't about money or status. It's about the connections we build, the love we share, and the courage to choose what's real over what's expected. The future would be different from anything they'd imagined, but maybe, just maybe, it would be better than the life they tried to force me into all those years ago. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about making others suffer, it's about showing them exactly what they lost by being unable to see beyond their own prejudices. And as we ate together, this broken family taking its first steps toward healing, I realized that success truly is the best revenge, not because it proves others wrong, but because it proves you right for believing in yourself when no one else would.